Sorry this video is so very late. I had an honest to God really hard time making it. I'm going to try to not turn this into my own personal therapy session, but I got a lot of people commenting on Lebanon and my decision to include it in my top 5 episodes. Let's make one thing clear. John is abusive, full stop. And I want to talk about why and some points that complicate that and the reasons why I think Lebanon was still so powerful. This is obviously just my opinion, and it comes heavily colored with my background. I grew up, it was pretty much just me and my mom. We didn't hunt demons, but there is not a single thing that John says in this show that isn't one or two tweaks away from something my mother said to me. Literally. And it fucked me up right proper. I was raised like this, and I was 21 when she died, and I was the one to bury her. I started watching the show very shortly after, and I have to say, it was hard as shit to watch. Way too fucking relatable and way too close to home, especially when he bit it. And if you had told me then the plot of Lebanon and told me I'd think it was a masterpiece, I would have told you were a goddamn idiot. But here we are. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's look at what we know of John in the show. I'm not going to analyze pre-Mary's death John, though he had some issues even back then, ex-Marine, blah blah, whatever, and I'm not going to go into comparisons with Bobby, who was sort of their protector and a far better father figure than John ever could have hoped to be, and I'm not going to diagnose him or explain the reasons why he was the way that he was, because there are reasons, but they don't matter. I'm having trouble organizing my thoughts on this because it's kicking up a lot of fresh trauma, so I guess I'll just go more or less chronological. I mean, that's what I do for most everything else. So, childhood. I mean, like, anyone who doesn't think John was abusive and neglectful didn't watch the show. Well, that's not true. Okay. Trauma is subjective. I've known some people who were like, yeah, John is harsh, but he does care about them, and that's crap. But hear me out. They don't know it's crap. If they weren't subjected to lifelong psychological abuse, then they're not hardwired to see it. They literally don't know what it's like. Because when their parents were harsh with them, it came entirely from a place of love. They were yelled at by their parents when their mom and dad were scared half to death out of their minds that they almost ran into traffic. They weren't yelled at when they simply spilled a bit of water on their book or left their coat on the bus by accident. And sure, maybe a lot of John's interactions with the boys was because he loved them and wanted them to be safe. But it didn't matter because in the end, he was yelling at them about everything. I don't doubt that John loved them, but that isn't the point here. Their dad waged a one-man war against the supernatural to avenge his wife. When they were little, his kids were liabilities, and when they got older, they were potential soldiers to be drafted into his vendetta. Hell, I don't even know how much he liked Dean. Sam, sure, the baby that his wife died trying to protect, but Dean looked like her and acted like her, and he probably saw her every time he looked into that kid's eyes. He was old enough to be stuck as Sam's guardian, and then became the scapegoat for everything that went wrong with Sam's upbringing, as if John himself wasn't the adult in the situation who was supposed to be taking care of them. Leading into how the boys were fucked up by this, Dean did everything he could his entire life to gain his father's favor. I did that. You jump when they say jump, you go above and beyond, you make yourself obedient. You figure day by day, if you just learn how to play the game right, they'll finally be proud of you. And they'll say it sometimes, but only when they actually want something from you, when they aren't themselves. Dean defined his entire personality around what he thought might make his dad happy, and he struggled most of his life with that. Sam, on the other hand, I personally don't know how to relate to Sam very much. Every time he started to start a fight with John, my anxiety hit the roof. I can't fathom saying any of those things, especially knowing that Dean would be the one to clean up that mess later and take the brunt of John's wrath. Flashbacks of the kids show how protective John was of Sam while simultaneously being cross with Dean for not protecting Sam well enough. He also just rampantly ignored them, leaving them for who knows how long at a time, and expecting Dean to just be an adult and watch his younger brother, even when he was like 8 years old and a kid himself. Dean gets caught for stealing once because he lost their money in a card game. Probably lost it trying to, make more money to try to feed Sam because their dad just didn't leave them enough or something, but his dad just decides to hang him out to dry for months. And it's clear that there is some combination of factors that prevented him from just dropping them off with Bobby. They'd have been safe. They'd have had a normal, stable home, and they'd have been able to stay in school and never worry about food. Dean would have been allowed to be a kid for 3 goddamn seconds, but I think he didn't do it because his kids really were only worth what they could be to him, and Bobby proved he wanted Dean to be a kid when he let him toss a ball around instead of target practice. If he dropped the kids off at Bobby's, they'd have been far less useful soldiers in his war. And then Sam leaves for college. Their dad closes the door behind him and he doesn't look back, leaving Dean properly alone for the first time in his life. So when their dad goes missing, Dean panics and of course he heads back for Sam. And that entire season is just their dad dicking them around. He could have called once and explained himself, but he doesn't. Dean straight up has a massive heart attack and is projected to die, and their dad doesn't call back when Sam calls him. He comes when they are in Lawrence to check on them, but that's far too little too late, not to mention a dick move in its own right. When they finally join up, it's instant friction. Sam is baiting their dad. Dean falls back into a sort of peacekeeper mode, trying to de escalate every fight. Every time they see their dad, it's terrible to watch. Just their whole dynamic. John keeps them in line and dependent by feeding them each important scrap of information piece by piece. Finally, after everything, after they go rescue their father because family is everything, Dean is the one who knows it's a trap because John is saying the things he wants to hear, and it instantly sets him on edge. He knows it's a trap. He doesn't know why, but it sets off every alarm bell because their dad wouldn't have forgiven him. Then watching John in the hospital sucks. Making all the plans he's making and saving Dean, sure, one last stupid thing he could do for his son, but there's two ways to look at it. Because either he wanted to do something fatherly and protective of Dean, and he's just a jackass and a dick about it, not telling Sam basically anything, or he wanted to make sure Dean went on because he needed somebody who could take out Sam when he went dark side, and he was just hoisting another burden on Dean. And either way, the outcome was Sam getting pushed around and Dean getting saddled with an impossible burden. John offers no meaningful comfort to his 22-year-old son, who is potentially watching his big brother die and is reasonably panicked about it. It's Bobby who sees his suffering and gives him comfort, allowing Sam to cling to fixing the car because it's a subconscious metaphor for Dean. And Dean is facing down the barrel of a gun. He has done everything for his dad, and his dad still isn't showing any indication it was enough.
You haven't even tried. Aren't you gonna do anything? Aren't you even gonna say anything? I've done everything you have ever asked me. Everything. I've given everything I've ever had. Are you just gonna sit there and you're gonna watch me die? And what the hell kind of father are you?
You can see their mourning process is even all fucked up. Sam, who practically hated the guy, instantly is feeling nostalgic and respectful of him out of guilt. Dean, who worshipped him, is finding himself on the other side of it, having received no absolution. His father died, leaving him yet another cryptic mess to clean up. Not to mention his dad died for him, he knows it, and he's been raised to believe he certainly isn't worth that. Now, when you're raised in this environment, it fucks you up good and proper for the rest of your life. Sam and Dean's decision making and worldview are irreparably damaged by this upbringing. Dean really never sheds the crushing self doubt or the feelings like the world is his responsibility and if something goes wrong, it's his fault. Sam never really gets his feet under him either, though he fares slightly better, having had several chances to live and grow and develop away from John. And the two hopelessly cling to each other since they were forced to their entire childhood and basically have no clue how to do anything else. Sam gives Dean a lot of crap for burying his emotions until they sort of explode, but Dean has been burying his emotions for decades under his father out of necessity. Over the years, we get small glimpses of their feelings about John. The episode where they think ghosts are calling people, Dean instantly snaps back to a desperation for their father's guidance. That's just a good old-fashioned trauma response. Though, I think one of the most telling things about John is that when Sam needed to contact someone in heaven to get Cass in to help Dean with the Mark of Cain, he didn't call his dad. John Winchester was in heaven, but Sam called Bobby to help save Dean. And that's all I need to know. Now, here's the thing with Lebanon. It isn't a John apologist beast. At least no more than the show already was. Rewatch season 1. It's their dad dicking them around, but every time they're in the same room, it's all, oh, I never wanted this for you, or I want you to just be safe, or I love you boys. And they're all like, we know, Dad. And now, Dean has complicated feelings about his father, and so does Sam. Dean even tried telling Mary that Dad was a shit show after she died. Lebanon is simply a snapshot. It's a couple hours. The shock at seeing him, the shock at him seeing Mary, it's all a honeymoon phase that didn't have long enough to play out. Of course everyone is happy. It's one meal. If John stayed another day, Sam and him would have started. Dean would have withdrawn. You can see a bit of it. John baits Sam right at the beginning, but Sam's older, much older, and isn't pulled into it as quick. The pearl didn't grant his wish, it granted his deepest desire, and Dean's core programming has always been family. Strip everything else away, and that's the only thing that is deep in his heart. The pearl extrapolates. He has his mother, he wants loving parents. John is there for 1 day. You notice they didn't give Dean any meaningful amount of time with him. Dean gravitated towards his mother during this time. He is thrilled, but he doesn't let himself be in a room alone with his father for more than a few minutes. Sam even almost leaves when he sees John alone, but he stands his ground, and John has nothing to lose right now. He sees things turned out all right, so he apologizes. Much like that one conversation way back in season 1 where he admits that he spent Sam's college fund on ammo. They share a moment. It's a drop in the bucket compared to back then. It's just a moment. The show isn't erasing all that, it's being very, very realistic. It isn't fresh trauma for either of them. It's been decades for them, for the pain to fade, and he wasn't there long enough to reopen those wounds. Dean didn't get a chance to open up to their dad, to confront them for all the shitty stuff he did. It was a few hours, and let me tell you, if he had, it would have done far more damage than it would have helped. Sam can separate himself from that. Dean would have opened a floodgate to repressed self doubt and despair. The small conversation they did have, when their dad mentions it isn't what he wanted for them, Dean keeps his distance from his dad. His body language is closed off. He has his shoulder leading towards his dad, and his moves are pretty hesitant. He sort of brushes it off, saying he's happy with the life and family he has. And he is. And when John says he's proud of them, there's that instant flicker of discomfort, because that still doesn't ring true. Also, God, if my mother was here today, knowing she had been dead, I bet she would apologize to me. Nothing left to lose and all that, and if she did, I'd have had the same reaction. It's something from a trauma perspective I need to hear. This scene with Sam hits me harder than anything else in the show, because the emotion is raw and it's realistic, but it's been 8 years since my mother died. 2 years out, if I was 23 years old, this would have all read entirely different, but now I can really appreciate it. But if my mom was here longer than that, it'd be terrible. Old habits can be pushed off, but they're there. They're always going to return. John is happy and at peace in these few hours, but he's still neck deep in his own trauma and his own conditioning. He wouldn't stay this person. He'd lapse right back into it. This episode isn't about how it's okay or how John's okay and he's a good person. This episode is about how two boys get a tiny bit of closure with something that has ruined their entire lives. It's about what it means to them. Forget John. And honestly, I think it's an important step in them moving on for good. For them to be able to focus. For Sam to be able to raise Jack with a little less fear that he'll fuck it up the way John fucked him up. Let Dean move on with a little less self doubt, knowing that in the end, their dad just said and meant that he was proud of them. No matter how shallow, it's probably the only time he heard it and believed it. And Mary gets one last goodbye, not having the baggage that those boys did. So, yeah, it's a fucking masterpiece, and I stand by it. I never meant to give the impression that I like John Winchester or that his actions were in any way forgivable, because. But it was the most true to the characters episode I think they ever had. And it was beautifully tragic, fully knowing that one way or another, that was it. Not to mention, all four of these actors just brought their A game. Damn. And that's that. I'm gonna cut this short here. This episode was harder to record than I thought it was gonna be. I don't even think I described it all right, and I'm hesitant to do another pass or go any deeper. I'm just gonna push this back down under a pile of intense repression and move on with my life. So don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.